A sealed note, no larger than a palm, began a journey that would shake a continent. It crossed 3 guarded borders, passed through the hands of quiet sympathizers and unmarked couriers, dodged checkpoints and satellite surveillance, until it arrived at the one place where hope was believed to be extinct, a prison cell in Abuja. The man receiving it, Nnamdi Kanu, sat in silence, unaware that this piece of paper would breathe life back into a movement buried in shadows. At the very moment that this letter was being slipped through the iron gates of Kuje prison, President Bola Tinubu was laughing on national television. Dressed in full ceremonial garb, he stood on the grand stage at Eagle Square, smiling into cameras as the nation marked Democracy Day. Behind him, banners fluttered and brass bands played triumphant hymns. But his speech wasn't just about unity or celebration. It was a declaration of dominance. With each word, he struck blows not just at his critics, but at the soul of dissent itself. He mocked opposition leader Peter Obi, calling him a man chasing illusions in the fog, and the crowd erupted. Ministers clapped obediently. Senators smirked in agreement. Then Tinubu turned to Kanu, his tone shifting from amusement to disdain. "And Nnamdi Kanu," he said with a cruel smirk, "he will rot where he belongs, forever." The applause that followed felt like thunder, but in truth it masked an earthquake brewing beneath the continent's feet. Because while Abuja celebrated power, in Ouagadougou, another kind of power was waking. President Ibrahim Traore watched the speech in silence, his jaw clenched. He didn't speak to his aides. He didn't rage. He simply stood up and walked to his desk and began to write. The lights burned low inside the presidential office in Ouagadougou as Traoré wrote with precision. His pen moved without hesitation, as if he had waited for this moment. The message was short, only one sentence, but every syllable struck like a drumbeat of defiance. "You are not forgotten." When he finished, he folded the note, pressed it with his seal, and handed it to a man waiting in the shadows. The envoy was Malian, young, quiet, and fiercely loyal. No uniform, no titles, just a man who knew how to move through borders without being seen. With the message hidden inside his jacket, he slipped into the night. His route was long and treacherous. A motorbike carried him across dusty back roads through northern Burkina Faso. He switched to a cattle truck at the border, blending in with traders. Then came the scorching sands of Niger, where patrols searched for anything suspicious. He moved only at night, drinking water from cracked flasks and eating dried bread. He avoided ECOWAS outposts and changed his route twice to dodge drone patrols, but he never lost the envelope. Days later, he reached Abuja under the cover of dusk. There were no embassies, no official channels. He waited outside the prison gates for a shift change, then passed the note to a sympathetic guard. Inside the prison, Kanu sat in darkness, unaware of the storm that was coming. He unfolded the paper. He read it once, then again. 3 words, a lifeline, a resurrection. "You are not forgotten." It was more than a message. It was a spark, and it would burn brighter than any torch. The walls of Kuje prison were thick and suffocating, designed to silence even the strongest spirits. No sunlight reached the cells. No sounds filtered in except the crackling of old radios and the shouts of indifferent guards. Kanu sat on a worn mattress, his body weak but his eyes unbroken. He had been there for months, denied a fair trial, deprived of contact, reduced to a whisper in the world he once thundered through. The letter, though small, shattered that silence. His cellmate, a university student arrested during a protest in Enugu, looked up. "What is it?" he asked. Kanu didn't respond immediately. He stared at the letter, pressed it to his chest, and whispered, "Africa hears me now." The young man didn't understand at first, but in that whisper was a message larger than any anthem. Outside the walls, the world kept turning. Tinubu continued his public campaign of strength and ridicule, speaking with confidence while mocking those who opposed him. His advisors reassured him. Kanu was broken, isolated, irrelevant. But they were wrong. The moment Traoré's letter touched Kanu's hands, something ancient and powerful began to stir. In Nairobi, an activist saw a blurred photo of the note shared on a small page. In Lagos, students heard whispers that something was happening. In the Sahel, the air shifted. It was subtle, like the rustling of leaves before a storm, but it was coming. Not with guns or tanks, but with belief. And belief was something no regime could predict, control, or kill. Inside Nigeria's corridors of power, the mood was changing. Behind the grandeur of Aso Rock, unease rippled like static. Tinubu's intelligence chiefs received a classified alert. Traoré's government had made direct contact with Nnamdi Kanu. No press, no public speeches, just a letter. But that alone had started a tremor. The room fell silent as National Security Advisor Nuhu Ribadu briefed the president. "Sir," he began carefully, "if Traoré speaks, the Sahel listens. And Kanu is no longer just a man, he's a signal." Tinubu's fingers tapped furiously on the table. "Then we smother the signal," he snapped. "Silence it before it grows." Orders were issued instantly. Monitor all Burkina Faso communications. Blacklist any social media post referencing Kanu and Traoré. Jam satellite signals if necessary. Flood timelines with distractions, economic headlines, celebrity news, government achievements. Influence foreign media to ignore the story. But deep down, even Tinubu knew the truth. Once an idea escapes a cell, it's already halfway to freedom. This wasn't just a security issue, it was a story, and stories spread faster than orders. In Nairobi, the letter's image had already gone viral. In Ghana, a radio host read the words aloud, his voice trembling. "You are not forgotten." Hashtags exploded across West Africa. Voice of Africa, Kanu speaks, Traoré listens. Artists painted murals overnight. Students held vigils. In Accra, a Nollywood actress posted a tearful video whispering, "We forgot him." But now they remembered, and so did the generals. In Kaduna, an old studio came alive with lights as retired General Musa Danjuma sat for an interview that would rewrite allegiances across Nigeria. Decorated, respected, and once a close ally of Tinubu, he had never broken ranks, until now. The interviewer asked a cautious question, "Do you still support the president?" Danjuma's face stayed calm, but his eyes burned. "I have watched this silence grow louder," he said, "and I can no longer stand by." The host froze. Viewers did too. Danjuma wasn't just any officer, he was a symbol of order, and now he was questioning it. "Traoré," he continued, "understands Africa in ways Abuja never will. We need voices like his, not silence enforced by fear." Within minutes, the clips spread like wildfire. Soldiers in barracks whispered. Civil servants rewatched the video in break rooms. Activists chanted his name beside murals of Kanu. The unthinkable was happening. A general had chosen conscience over loyalty. Inside Aso Rock, Tinubu's rage boiled. "He was my ally," he screamed. "An old man chasing headlines." But he knew the truth. When generals question the crown, the army listens. That night, Danjuma posted a short note on his military blog. "Traoré speaks like Sankara. Imperfect, but real. And Africa needs that now." It ended with 3 words: Africa deserves better. Across the continent, hearts beat louder. The silence was crumbling. In Burkina Faso, television screens flickered, then went dark. For a moment, there was nothing. No commercials, no news, just static. Then a live feed appeared, raw and unpolished. President Ibrahim Traore stood alone in a dim room, wearing his brown fatigues. Behind him, a map of Africa, worn at the edges. He didn't need music or introductions. He began to speak, slow and steady. "To every African watching this, understand one thing. Nnamdi Kanu is not a criminal, that's all." Across the continent, people leaned in. In Bamako, drivers stopped their cars. In Nairobi, children watched beside their parents. In Lagos, a journalist wept silently. His words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They echoed with conviction. "They tried to bury him," Traoré continued, "but voices like his grow in the dark." Inside Aso Rock, Tinubu's team scrambled to cut the feed. But it was too late. The video was already being mirrored in South Africa, rebroadcast in Ghana, downloaded in Senegal. It spread faster than fire in dry grass. "This is not just about one man," Traoré finished. "It's about the Africa we will leave behind, one ruled by fear or one led by truth." Then the screen went black. But the silence that followed was not emptiness. It was a continent waking up. The next morning, protests erupted across West Africa, not with chaos, but with poetry. In Lagos, school children carried placards that read, "Truth cannot be jailed." In Banjul, griots sang the story of Kanu and Traoré to drum beats in the markets. In Abidjan, teenagers projected Traoré's speech onto the walls of French-owned banks. Across WhatsApp groups and Telegram channels, encrypted messages buzzed with energy. "We see the light." But it wasn't just the people who felt it. Security forces hesitated. Riot police in Abuja removed their helmets during a demonstration and let the chants pass over them. One officer muttered, "He speaks for us too." The regime's reaction was swift. Tinubu deployed digital task forces to censor hashtags and flood timelines with disinformation. Claims that Traoré was a terrorist, that Kanu had gone mad. But it backfired. Every lie sparked more curiosity, more truth-seeking. Meanwhile, Kanu's health improved. A new guard, a sympathizer, sneaked him clean water and fruit. The whispers reached Kanu in the dark. "They are marching for you." For the first time in months, he smiled. "Let them march," he said. "I will walk with them soon." Behind bars, he began to prepare. Not for war, but for something greater. Testimony, a reckoning. Meanwhile, in Accra, an African Union summit was scheduled, a gathering of heads of state. Tinubu planned to use it as his grand performance, to rally support, to drown out Traoré's momentum. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Traoré had a seat waiting for someone else. An empty chair, reserved, labeled simply, "For the man who was never silenced." At the AU summit in Accra, the atmosphere buzzed with tension. Delegates sipped water, glanced over notes, and exchanged polite nods. But beneath it all was a storm brewing. Tinubu arrived in a polished convoy, smiling broadly, flanked by his most loyal ministers. He shook hands, posed for photos, and took his seat at the front. He was prepared to dominate the narrative, to paint Traoré as a destabilizer and himself as the custodian of order. But then, the murmurs began. Cameras swiveled. Delegates pointed. At the far end of the hall, a figure in traditional white stepped through the door. It was not Traoré. It was something far more shocking. General Danjuma. Not retired, not quiet, not loyal anymore. He walked slowly, deliberately, and placed a document on the table in front of the summit. "A petition," he said simply, "for the immediate release of Nnamdi Kanu under international supervision." Gasps rippled across the room. Some stood in applause. Others whispered to aides. Tinubu's smile twitched, then vanished. "You can't do this," he hissed across the aisle. Danjuma responded, eyes locked. "We already are." The chair labeled, "For the man who was never silenced," remained empty, but it might as well have been glowing. The press outside caught the image and sent it around the world. That empty seat said everything. Kanu's voice was now in every room, even if his body remained behind bars. That day, multiple countries voted in favor of an investigation into Kanu's detention. Sanctions loomed. Tinubu's control was slipping, not through guns or tanks, but through truth and courage. Africa was listening. In a quiet compound in Niamey, 3 young African journalists gathered around a cracked laptop. They had hacked into private documents revealing secret prison transfers planned for Kanu. The regime was preparing to move him, possibly to a black site outside the country, where media and courts couldn't reach. The young reporters knew the risk. Exposure meant imprisonment, or worse. But they acted quickly. The report was published under the headline, "Where is Kanu? Nigeria plots disappearance." Within hours, international watchdogs released emergency statements. Human Rights Africa demanded intervention. Amnesty International raised red flags at the UN. France and Germany issued cautious comments. Tinubu, under mounting pressure, called a press conference to discredit the claims. He stood tall, eyes cold. "Nnamdi Kanu is safe," he said. "Our nation is sovereign, and no one shall dictate to us." But his voice cracked. Reporters asked about the petition, about the seat, about Traoré. He dodged every question. Outside the hall, a woman held up a mirror, not a placard. She said nothing. The message was clear. Look at yourself. Meanwhile, in the prison, Kanu was moved, but not far. A loyalist inside the facility leaked his location. It was a desperate attempt to buy time. Civil society groups swarmed the court system, filing appeals. Judges, once silent, began to question his extended detention. Inside the cells, other prisoners chanted his name at night. Kanu! Kanu! Tinubu had tried to bury him again, but the continent refused to forget. His voice echoed louder with every lie the regime told. Burkina Faso became a beacon. Youth camps sprung up across the country, voluntary, disciplined, and peaceful. They named them Kanu circles. Teenagers read African history aloud by firelight, quoting Sankara, Lumumba, and now Kanu. Africa is not a battlefield, one girl said during a gathering. It's a heartbeat, and we must be its pulse. The spirit of Pan-Africanism, long buried under broken promises and foreign interference, was stirring again. Traoré addressed one such gathering from a wooden stage built by villagers. No teleprompter, no soldiers. They fear Kanu, he told them, because he dares to dream without their permission. The crowd erupted. Even elders nodded, eyes moist. In Mali, truck drivers printed his face on their windshields. Nairobi pulling in a net. May he reach every shore. Meanwhile, Nigeria's internet blackout policies expanded, cutting off protests and blocking external monitoring. But the people had adapted. Satellite phones were used by student networks. Drone footage of peaceful marches was uploaded through hidden IP routes. From Port Harcourt to Jos, young artists painted murals in hidden corners. Kanu's face, Traores Silhouette, a single phrase between them. We remember. In London, exiled Igbo leaders convened a roundtable. We must strike while the fire burns, one said, but with our minds, not fists. They sent a formal appeal to ECOWAS demanding not only Kanu's release, but reforms to prevent future political imprisonments across Africa. The movement was no longer just about one man. It was about what he represented. Traoré's next move was audacious. In collaboration with East African reformists, he announced an Afro-Truth Tribunal, a people's court to investigate political detentions across Africa, starting with Kanu's case. Though it held no legal power, it carried moral weight. The first session was live-streamed across YouTube, TikTok, and dozens of African community radio stations. Testimonies came from former detainees, ex-judges, and even a retired Nigerian warden who admitted tearfully to having followed unlawful orders. I saw him pray for his captors, the warden said, and I broke. The broadcast was watched by millions. Even in Nigeria, where VPNs became a lifeline to free media, students hosted secret viewing sessions. In Kano University, a philosophy professor paused the stream and turned to his class. This, he said, is the new Africa writing itself. Meanwhile, Tinubu's government dismissed the tribunal as a digital circus, but cracks in his inner circle widened. 2 senators defected, citing conscience. A court clerk leaked internal documents showing Tinubu had personally blocked judicial orders in Kanu's favor. The evidence reached international journalists. The New York Times ran the headline, "Silencing the Storm, How Nigeria Keeps Kanu in the Cage." Embarrassed and under watch, Tinubu withdrew his AU bid and refused to attend future ECOWAS meetings. His absence became louder than his presence. By now, the people had stopped asking if Kanu would be released. They were asking when, and what he would say first. One thing was certain. When he spoke again, the world would be listening, not just out of curiosity, but out of necessity. Truth had become the most valuable currency in Africa's fragile political economy. Back in the depths of the detention center, Kanu was handed a pencil and a notebook, perhaps a careless oversight or perhaps divine timing. He began to write, not manifestos or revenge, but stories, memories of childhood, his mother's songs, the rhythms of the village. Let them see I am still human, he scribbled, more than an icon, a man with laughter and longing. One guard smuggled out a few pages, and they found their way to an online literary journal in Nairobi. The headline read, Letters from the Quiet Cell. The prose moved readers across the continent. Lines like, they chained my limbs but not my language, and I dreamt of rain, and it came, were quoted in schools and coffee shops. Teachers began incorporating Kanu's lines into their African literature lessons. Artists illustrated his dreams. Musicians put his words to rhythm. In Senegal, a rapper released a track called "The Wall Has Ears" using Kanu's own verse. It went viral in 48 hours. Even some foreign diplomats, once hesitant, began speaking privately about the Kanu situation. Inside the prison, guards whispered his words to each other. He says the sky still opens at night. He writes about birds. Something was happening that Tinubu could not control. Empathy, not political empathy, human empathy. And it was turning Kanu from a prisoner into something greater, a mirror. Everyone who read his words saw themselves. A son, a mother, a teacher, a rebel. And so, the regime's final weapon, dehumanization, was failing. Kanu had written his way out of their prison, even if the bars remained. It was around this time that Chidi Nwosu, a young coder from Enugu, launched a project called Echo Kanu. It was an AI-driven voice engine trained on Kanu's speeches and writings. Users could input a message, and the system would translate it into a tone and style mimicking Kanu. It wasn't about faking his words, it was about extending his voice. Millions began using it to create social justice messages, anti-corruption memos, and even lullabies. "I had my daughter sleep to Kanu's voice," one mother in Kenya posted. "She said he sounded like courage." Tinubu's administration tried to ban the app, calling it digital insurrection, but that only increased downloads. Echo Kanu went global. Students in Brazil used it during African Heritage Month. Caribbean activists included it in Black liberation seminars. A virtual chorus of Kanu's voice rose, not in monotony, but in unity. And still, he had said nothing officially. That was part of the power. The silence became sacred. Sacred enough that, in Abuja, a group of Christian and Muslim clerics held a joint fast for his release. In mosques and churches, prayers lifted his name, not as a saint, but as a symbol. In the face of mounting global attention, Tinubu finally offered a limited pardon, freedom in exchange for exile and silence. The offer was leaked. Kanu's handwritten reply shook the continent. It read, "I will not trade silence for chains. I will speak where I stand, or I will stand where I'm chained. But I will speak." It was signed with one word, alive. It broke the internet and the myth of his defeat. Traoré made his final gambit. He formally invited Nnamdi Kanu to address the new Pan-African Congress, scheduled for Lagos. The announcement stunned the region. Lagos, still under Tinubu's shadow, was the last place anyone expected such defiance. The invite was symbolic. Kanu was still imprisoned, but it set a clock ticking. In response, Tinubu doubled military presence in southern Nigeria. He declared a 30-day emergency alert, citing subversive threats. But this only emboldened the movement. Musicians, authors, students, and even members of the national football team began wearing pins marked June 30th, hear him. On June 30th, the world watched. In Lagos, thousands gathered despite armed patrols. Giant screens were erected. Some feared violence, others prayed. The Congress began with a moment of silence, and then from a hidden location, a voice was broadcast. Not AI, not fabricated, but Kanu himself. The prison had failed to silence him. A guard-turned-ally had smuggled out the recording. The voice was clear, slow, calm. "Africa," he said, "is not a place of chains. It is a rhythm. It is a mother. And we are its children returning." Cheers erupted. Some wept. Others fell to their knees. "I do not call for revenge," he said. "I call for a reckoning with the truth. Let those who fear it face it. Let those who live it lead." That day something shifted, not in parliament, not in law, but in the soul of a continent. And the one-time prisoner, still behind concrete and bars, became something else entirely, a page in the new African scripture. Kanu was still not free. The cells had not opened, but Africa had. In the weeks that followed, more than a dozen African leaders called for his release, not out of diplomacy, but out of necessity. Civil unrest had become civil awakening. 1,000,000 pens had replaced 1,000 guns. Tinubu's approval collapsed. Traoré's influence expanded into education, agriculture, and media across West Africa. Schools began teaching African resistance literature, not as tragedy, but as prophecy. And everywhere, the slogan rose, "We are all Kanu." It appeared on billboards in Uganda, stickers in Cameroon, graffiti in Johannesburg. From Cairo to Cape Town, it echoed. At the United Nations, a motion was drafted, the right to speak, protection for political prisoners, and it cited Kanu by name. His cell remained locked, but his legacy was already writing laws, building classrooms, inspiring artists. His letters became a book, The Prisoner Who Wrote the Sky, translated into 11 African languages within months. Inside his cell, Kanu continued to write, meditate, and hope, not for revenge, not even for freedom, but for a generation that wouldn't need men like him to suffer in order to speak. "I do not want to be your hero," he wrote, "only your echo until you become your own thunder." And so it ended, not with a bang, but with a voice rising from concrete silence into continental song. In the end, they never broke him. They built him. And in building him, they built the beginning of something new. A post-colonial Africa, no longer defined by borders or bullets, but by voices no regime could cage. Not anymore. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Hit that like button to support voices that dare to speak truth. Subscribe for more powerful stories from across Africa. Stories that mainstream media won't show you. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. Drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? What does freedom mean to you? And most importantly, share this video with someone who believes it's time for Africa to rise. Because the revolution isn't just in the streets, it's in our voices, and it starts with you.